Coming up on Primetime Lawmakers, big news of the job creation front. Governor Nathan Deal announces a new Caterpillar facility near Athens. It'll mean 1,400 new jobs. Controversial debate over the creation of the city of Ashford in DeKalb County. Both those for and against say it's a question of local control. New life for dead logs. The Senate passes a measure allowing private companies to bid to remove old sunken logs from Georgia's riverbeds. It could be a revenue generator, but environmental groups have concerns. And it's the end of the legislative week. I'll be joined on set for some of the best political analysis on the air by Buddy Darden, former state legislator and congressman, and Chuck Clay, former state senator and senior partner of Brock Clay. We'll have some fun with that tonight for Friday, February 17, 2012, the 21st legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. This is Primetime Lawmakers. Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Let's go right live to the Capitol, where Sandra Parrish reports there was a big job announcement today.
Scott, after much speculation the last couple of days, Caterpillar, probably best known for its yellow construction equipment, will be building a 1 million square foot facility off highways 316 and 78, straddling Athens, Clark County and Oconee County, bringing a huge investment to Georgia and thousands of jobs with it.
And $200 million investment in Northeast Georgia will make a huge difference in this state. And we thank you very much for doing that.
With Georgia's unemployment rate hovering close to 10%, Governor Nathan Deal says today's announcement comes at a good time.
1,400 new jobs, thousands more that will be spin off as a result of that. That will represent the largest growth of new jobs in the state of Georgia since Kia came to Georgia in 2006.
Caterpillar actually expects more than 4,000 jobs will be created throughout the U.S. as a result of suppliers needed for the new plant. Production of its mini hydraulic excavators and small track-type tractors is being shifted from Japan due to the large base of customers in North America and Europe.
Logistics is a critical success factor for our business, and the proximity of Athens to the Savannah port will be a major plus for us.
CEO Doug Oberhelman says Georgia's transportation sales tax vote also played a key role.
95% of the world's customers are outside this country. A lot of our competition is outside this country, and they want our jobs and they want our customers, and we have to be competitive at Caterpillar. The U.S. has to be competitive, and Georgia has to be competitive. And that Transportation Investment Act you're working on is critical to make Georgia competitive.
Athens Clark County Mayor and CEO Nancy Denson says it's a big boon for the local area.
It's going to mean a lot of jobs. It's going to mean a lot of money in our community. It's going to be economic stimulus. It's the pride element in our community has to just jump up about 500% today.
Ground will soon be broken on the site, with production expected to begin late next year. The House passes a bill today that could lead to the creation of Georgia's newest city in North DeKalb County. The 12 square mile area is currently known as Brookhaven, but the name was changed in committee to Ashford so as not to confuse people with the area in Atlanta known as historic Brookhaven.
We are not forcing a city on anyone. We are giving these citizens an opportunity to vote on whether they would like to govern themselves at a more local level and enjoy the benefits that go along with having a city government closer to the people than simply being out in the wilderness in unincorporated DeKalb County.
I'm sure that this will be an issue of discussion as it goes through the Senate, and hopefully the folks in the community will sit down between the folks who live in historic Brookhaven and the folks who live in the rest of this proposed new city and come up with a name that they can all rally behind. And as I have also told folks in this area that are concerned over this name, a rose by any other name smells just as sweet. And this is going to be a sweet new city in North DeKalb.
We're talking, on the creation of this new city, we're not just talking about 49,000 residents. We're talking a large commercial base that is going to affect my county. It is going to affect those of us who are not living in the city at all, because it's going to take money out of my county's coffers to provide services to the majority of the people of DeKalb County. That's roughly 650,000 folks that are going to be impacted that have absolutely no opportunity to vote whatsoever.
And as Representative Lindsay said, don't be surprised if the name changes again when it heads to the Senate. If passed this session, those 49,000 residents would vote in July. The House also passes a bill today to change how the state calculates funding for schools so that the local school district spend per student is taken into account. The idea is to equalize those numbers so that more money goes to the state's poorest schools.
The way we do equalization today is we rank the school systems from 1 to 180 based on how much property tax digest they have per child. Because that's basically, think about if I'm a school board member, I want to generate revenue, I'm going to assess 1 mil of property tax. How much money do I get per my kid that I'm trying to educate per property tax mill? And we rank people because that's how much the local boards have the ability to generate money for their funding. And that number varies wildly across the state. Greene County, by assessing 1 mil of property tax, can get $660 per child. The poorest counties, Tryon and Pelham City, or systems rather, are below $30 a child when trying to get property tax money. So you have a 20-to-1 difference in the ability of boards to generate money. So what is our proposed fix for equalization? We're going to take the statewide average of property tax per child and equalize to that. And in calculating that average, we throw out statistically the top 5% of counties and the lower 5% of counties. And that lower 5% still gets their equalization. We're not throwing them out in the cold. We're just saying those little tiny numbers like $30 for a kid don't mess up the average. So when you get that average, and if you're below the average, you will continue to get equalization. If you're above, you are not.
Many of you have concerns because some of your systems are losers under this proposal. What the changes do here today is very simple. It pushes the money used in equalization to the poorest school systems that can least afford to educate the children, that have the least ability by raising millage rates to come up with an adequate amount of cash to do their part in educating those children. That's all this does.
Representative England, who chairs the House Appropriations Committee, says today's changes are just a part of an overhaul to the QBE funding formula that's planned, and an effort will be made to fully fund it in coming years as the economy improves. Scott.
Sandra, boiling down a complicated issue. Thank you very much. If you were at the Capitol today, you may have seen some very famous faces. A car dealership in Gainesville is promoting its event tomorrow that it calls the largest ever gathering of professional political impersonators on a President's Day weekend. Some of those faces you may have seen today included President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle, former Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton, also Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin. There she is. They do a pretty good job with that. Just a reminder that opportunities to vote early in the March presidential preference primary are already available. Absentee voting by mail began in January, and in-person early voting began Monday. Early voting varies by county, but state law requires that early voting polling sites be open Saturday, February 25th. Early voting sites may be different than regular polling places. If you have access to the web, you can find yours on the Secretary of State's My Voter page site at sos.ga.gov/MVP. You can Google the Georgia Secretary of State to get to that too. You can also register to vote or request an absentee ballot through that site. If you're mailing in an absentee ballot, it must be postmarked on or before March 6th. And just a quick note about next week's legislative schedule. The General Assembly is in recess on Monday, but will be in session Tuesday through Friday of next week. The Senate is expected to pass their version of the FY12 amended budget, and the new vote on the charter schools legislation could happen at any time in the House. You don't want to miss Lawmakers next week. Join us Tuesday through Friday after the PBS NewsHour. The Senate closes out the week with the passage of 6 bills. Let's go back down to the Capitol to now, where our Keosha Howard is standing by with those highlights. Keosha.
Scott, that's right. The Senate was quite busy today. The state's rivers could get a deep cleaning. The Senate passes a measure that would allow deadhead logging, or the removal of logs that fell into the bottoms of Georgia's rivers over a century ago. Senate President Pro Tem Tommy Williams is the bill's sponsor.
What this bill does is allows for the selling of deadhead logs. These are logs that were cut down by our pioneers back in the 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s. Most of the states around us allow for the retrieval of these logs. The way this would work is the state would have a sealed bid situation where they sold a certain stretch of river and the logs that were on it.
Are you concerned, sir, with the environmental impact of potentially removing these logs from the river?
The protections that are in the bill allow for the department to come up with all the rules and regs regarding how you extract the log, where you exit the log from the river, and to make sure that, you know, our natural resources are not damaged.
If the measure receives final passage, deadhead logs will be sold under the supervision of the State Forestry Commission. The bill now goes to the House. The Senate also passed a measure that would allow legislators to introduce special local option sales taxes, or SPLOS, of less than 1%. Under current law, all SPLOS must be 1%. This bill would maintain 1% as a cap, and of course, voters will have the final say on any proposed SPLOS. Superior Court judges could get more control. The Senate passes a measure today that increases the fine for contempt of court from $500 to $1,000. Senator Jesse Stone says this change is long overdue.
It adjusts the fines that Superior Court judges can levy on unruly conduct or other acts of contempt. It helps them control their courtrooms, litigant behavior, and it is an adjustment that is long overdue. It has not changed for nearly 30 years.
In other Senate news, the charter schools discussion continues today. This has been a hot button issue throughout this session, with the constitutional amendment pending that would allow the state to create charter schools. Those in favor of the legislation say parents and students need more education options. Those opposed say the amendment limits local control. The Department of Education released a report on Wednesday that says 73% of traditional public schools and 70% of charters made annual yearly progress. Senator Vincent Fort says that this report proves that charters do not outperform traditional public schools.
We're so concerned about process and the technicalities, we are not focusing on what's important, and that is children and their performance. All of this is going on, all of this debate, all of this rancor, at the same time that we see that charter schools do not perform better than our other schools. It seems to me that we should be focusing on that as opposed to focusing on the technicalities and process of changing our state constitution.
If we really believe that education is supposed to be all about the kids, we'll give just as many options as possible to help those kids get the best education in Georgia. So let's stand up for the kids, not educrats, and make sure we're doing the right thing, giving them the most options.
Last year, the Supreme Court ruled that the state could not create charter schools and use local funds to run them. The constitutional amendment that would allow the state to create charter schools failed in the House last week, but the House did vote to reconsider the measure. We expect their vote on that again next week. Senator Fran Miller holds a similar Senate version of the charter schools amendment. Scott, his assistant, tells me he's waiting to see what happens with the House version before he files his.
The old standby version of the Senate. Thank you very much, Kiosha. Coming up after the break, it's the end of the legislative week, and we've got our weekend review. From charter schools to gun bills, there's been a lot of movement since Wednesday. Stay with us. Much more to come. Week 7 of the legislative session, and although it's only been 3 legislative days this week, it's been action-packed. Kiosha Howard has the highlights for their weekend review.
This week, under the Gold Dome, on Wednesday, the 19th legislative day, inspired by the shocking disappearance and death of Kaylee Anthony, legislation is introduced making it a felony to fail to report a missing child. Few people haven't heard of the little Florida girl who went missing and was ultimately found dead in 2008. Now, Representative B.J. Pack wants a law to protect children here in Georgia and to require their parents to report their disappearance within a timely manner.
Every year, approximately, there's 800,000 children missing that get reported missing. At the same time, what the law enforcement are telling me is that an early reporting of that is critical in trying to locate the child.
The bill would also make it a felony if the death of a child was not reported within 12 hours. So far, 14 other states have similar laws, and a dozen others are considering legislation. Negotiations continued between the Republican leadership in the House and the Democratic caucus over state charter schools. Majority Whip Edward Lindsey called last week's failed vote on the constitutional amendment that would have allowed the state to approve the schools a test vote. Lindsey says he's confident they will come up with more than enough votes needed to pass it.
The key thing is not to let any one side get bent up about this must there has to be a winner and a loser. We want the winners to be the students in the state of Georgia.
Also on Wednesday, the Senate Special Judiciary Committee heard testimony on a bill that would impose a penalty of a felony on those convicted for a second time of a DUI with a child in the car. The measure also allows a felony charge against those convicted of a DUI who were involved in a car accident resulting in the death of a child. The committee gave the DUI bill a do-pass recommendation, and it now moves on to Senate rules. On Thursday, the official halfway point of the 2012 session, behind-the-scenes work continued on the constitutional amendment to allow state charter schools. A compromise was reached. Representative Scott Holcomb sponsored the measure that spelled out what a state-approved charter school is and how it would be funded.
But since we had a vote that failed last week, if they want to get something passed, something had to move. And I think if they were just to bring it up the same way, without any changes, without listening to what are significant concerns, and they're not only significant concerns to some of us in the metro area, which my district is in Atlanta, but in the rural areas, because people want to make sure that the state funding for those rural schools does not go down, and that's an important question.
A vote on that legislation could come as early as next week. A controversial measure was introduced that would allow guns to be carried on college campuses and other currently restricted areas. Second Amendment advocates and law enforcement are at odds over this one. Bill sponsor Representative Sean Jurgensen says those with carry permits could take them almost anywhere.
Federal facilities, courthouses, jails, and prisons. Those would be the off-limit places and private property where the private property owners do not want them to be carried.
Jurgensen says the bill would only affect about 300,000 Georgians who have gone through a background check and have been fingerprinted. Senators invoke the name and legacy of former Governor Zell Miller as discussion about the future of the Hope Scholarship gets heated. Senator Jason Carter says,
"If we continue down this path, we will march backwards. We will turn back the clock on the exact issues that you just heard Zell Miller speak about when he introduced the Hope Scholarship, the need for an educated workforce, the need to ensure that the middle class and the hardworking students from the middle class can afford and access to higher education."
He said that it was not only for low income, not only for middle income, but those were his words, all inclusive. Governor Miller presided over the expansion of this program.
Also on Thursday, spurred on by last year's execution of Troy Davis, activists and legislators call for an end to the death penalty in Georgia.
There's a new wind blowing in Georgia. The execution of Troy Davis has sent out a clarion call across this state and across our nation that we should move into the 21st century.
And that's a look back at what happened this week under the Gold Dome.
We've got to take a short break in Primetime Lawmakers, but don't go anywhere. There's much more to come. Buddy Darden and Chuck Clay will be joining me on set. When we come back, they'll help put everything into perspective. So stay with us. We'll be right back. As you saw just a few moments ago, although this week's been a short one, a lot of action under the Gold Dome, continuing with our end of the week festivities. And for invaluable insight, we welcome in our good friend Buddy Darden. Buddy's a former state legislator and U.S. congressman. He's senior counsel at McKenna, Long, and Aldridge. And it's our pleasure to welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers Chuck Clay, former state senator and senior partner at Brock Clay. Great to have you both with us.
Pleasure, as always.
Why don't we start with Governor Deal putting on that Caterpillar hat earlier today. 1,400 jobs for Georgia. That's an excellent start. Are we on the right track?
Thumbs up. Right start, or one in a lifetime. That is a great shot of good economic news. Nobody would argue.
Best possible news you could have. I was in Athens today at the dedication of the Richard B. Russell Special Collections Library, and I saw a number of Athenians who were so excited because not only will it hire people with advanced degrees, but it will hire people with high school and technical education. So it's going to be a great thing for not only for Northeast Georgia, but the entire state.
Skilled workers, good paying jobs.
Yeah,
great.
The machines to make these small excavators are very complicated, and they aren't blue-collar jobs. They're high-tech jobs.
High-paying, well-paying jobs on the assembly line of a great company. So we all should be proud.
Very automated now, and precision-type work.
Do we have to give up much to get that, or is this a good deal? Even if they gave them the land?
We made $45 million in concessions, that is revenue foregone, but quite frankly this is revenue that would not have come in anyway, and when you look at the overall benefit to the taxpayers and the people in Northeast Georgia and the entire state, we'll get our money back many times over, in my opinion.
Sound investment that a company like this not only invest because there may be incentives, but they invest because they see the future of selling equipment in this part of the country.
Let's put it this way, we've given up a whole lot more for less.
Okay, good point. It may maybe to light the fuse for more such things.
Absolutely.
We'll watch it. Another issue, City of Ashford, otherwise known as the area of Brookhaven in North DeKalb County.
The last thing we need is another city around here. In fact, my friends who live in the city of Atlanta call themselves living in Brookhaven, but they're in the city of Atlanta, but they won't be in Brookhaven. And then they don't like it, so they change it to Ashford. But to me, I just think it's pure folly. We don't need another city.
I think it's coming.
Huh? 49,000 people? Well, they get the chance to vote on it.
They get a chance to vote.
Yes, yes.
They get a chance
if
to
it
vote.
passes the.
But that's just what we need is another government, another police force.
People feel passionately that local government provides those services better. They've got to make that decision. I do sometimes wonder how many cities, we got a lot of them, that maybe shouldn't be there, but this is an area that the voters get to decide.
I don't think they like the name of Ashford, though.
He and Mr. Dunwoody got together some time ago, didn't they? Okay. Charter schools compromise. Moving ahead, there's a standby bill waiting in the Senate for that state to constitutional amendment. Where are we going with this?
Still too early. Last time I said it was here, I thought it would pass the House and stall in the Senate. It stalled in the House. I'm not sure it's changed in the Senate. The compromise has to do with ensuring that local funds would not be utilized by charter schools, but the fact of the matter, it doesn't change fundamentally the underlying issue. Are you for state-sponsored charter schools or not? The interesting part about this one is it cuts across party lines. There are urban Democrats that are key supporters, and there are rural Republicans who simply do not want to vote for this. So
you're absolutely right, but you've got to get 120 votes in the House. And incidentally, Scott, a number of your viewers have asked me about the requirement that you have a 2/3 majority, but that's different from the United States Congress. In the United States Congress, in the House of Representatives, you only have to have 2/3 of the members present and voting, assuming you've got a quorum. But in Georgia, this is a pretty steep requirement. You've got to have a constitutional 2/3 majority of 120, regardless of how many people are there.
10 short? That's 10 short, fairly steep hill to climb because there's not necessarily one issue that would bring the difference over. A lot of arm twisting going on.
I was going to say,
here's what's going on.
A lot of pressure on Republicans. It'll be interesting to see.
Here's what's going on. The authors realize that they can't go in with 120 votes. They've got to have at least 125 or 127 because people have a tendency to, shall we say, change their mind or maybe change their principles sometimes right before
there is a fudge factor on these things.
So I would not say it's a fudge factor, but I would say you've got to allow for people who might have a change of heart sometime
or
during
simply
the vote.
maybe got misdirected and found themselves lost in the parking lot or had an emergency at home or were otherwise indisposed.
Right.
That was a former state senator who has gone to his reward now, who used to be notorious for having to take a bathroom break whenever a tough vote like that comes. So you've got to look out for those things.
Well, that's why they serve dinner from the varsity on Sine Die Day, right?
It gets it done.
Okay.
It gets it done.
Firearms carry bill. This has come up again. There's a proposal to even broaden places people can carry weapons with a carry permit.
You know, in this General Assembly, it doesn't seem that there's really any sort of gun bill from silencers to permits that doesn't pass. I'm not sure. Every time I think that and I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment, that I think we've reached the limits. There's always new bills, and they always seem to pass.
Let me make one suggestion now. Georgia has probably some of the least restrictive gun laws in the country. In fact, some of our gun stores even get sued because of all the guns they sell end up in the wrong hands. So let me make one suggestion here. Why don't we allow people to bring guns to the Capitol, to the General Assembly, and then not change anything else? And if they want the guns, let them bring them to the Capitol.
There's been a couple of those bills that passed that were ultimately vetoed by Governor. I can assure when I was there was, and I thought, wow, 39th day, firearms on the floor.
Is there going to be a fight?
Maybe the one place you don't want it.
Is there going to be a fight over collecting sales tax on the internet? E-fairness.
Huge. Interesting. Wall Street, Main Street. You've got small retailers on the square in Marietta, down in Camilla to Tifton. The large companies like the Walmarts and the Home Depots are aligned against those out of state. Not picking on Amazon, but that's they're the big gorilla about what is fair. If you've got to charge 6% sales tax on a gift on the square in Marietta, and Amazon doesn't, guess where the shoppers are going to go? But it's become a bit of a philosophical debate about whether it's a tax or not, and how do you define a nexus, the connection to Georgia. But fundamentally, there will be a bill, and it's going to be interesting to see whether the home guys, the Home Depots and the small retailers will find a way to impose fairness on this issue, or whether it's just seen as a tax that will not pass and is not needed and will inhibit internet sales.
Grover Norquist coming down.
Here's the problem right here as I see it. Grover Norquist notwithstanding coming down here and making people sign pledges, but more than that, once you're used to not paying taxes, and once you're accustomed to going online and not having to pay Amazon or LL Bean or all these other people, and then all of a sudden it's put on you, that's tough. And
the key
that's going to be hard to do.
is how do you define a connection to this state? Nobody wants to put a sales tax on a snowshoe salesman in Nome, Alaska that sells one pair in Georgia. So the key is how do you define when a company is doing business in Georgia that ought to pay the same sales tax that every other company
And like
pays.
so many other things, it'll go through a jobs filter.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks so much for being with us.
That's it?
That's it, yeah. Well, we may get back and talk about the amended budget next week. How about that? The
Yes, sir.
supplemental budget. Thanks very much, gentlemen.
Always glad to be here.
Yeah, Primetime Lawmakers will return on Tuesday, February 21st, where the General Assembly convenes for Legislator Day 22. Next week, the FY 2012 supplemental budget, the little budget, expected to be passed out as Senate appropriations. It'll be interesting to see if they find a bunch more fuel tax money lying around. The full Senate could take up the $18.5 billion spending bill before the end of next week. We'll have complete coverage, plus all the latest news from under the Gold Dome. The Lawmakers returns on Tuesday. If you missed any part of this broadcast, catch Primetime Lawmakers when it repeats at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Coming up next on GPB, Rick Steves' Europe. Tonight, Rick visits the capitals of Finland and Estonia with neoclassical and medieval architecture. These two Baltic sisters are only a few hours apart. It's Helsinki and Tallinn on Rick Steves next on GPB. And that's our broadcast for this 21st legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slate. Join us Tuesday night for Primetime Lawmakers only on GPB. Have a great weekend.
This is a GPB original production.